Patrick Graham, Transfiguration at the Hugh Gallery, open to the public from the 17th of March until the 10th of July. Patrick Graham is one of Ireland's most renowned artists who began painting in the 1980s. We put in 2 self-portraits, and the span of those self-portraits is something like close to 40 years. So we have an early work from 1977, and it's of the self.
It is, yeah.
What is it like looking at that span of time in regards to looking at yourself, and what is it about the self-portrait that intrigues you in your work?
The self-portrait was always a revelation to myself. It wasn't to anybody else. I never bothered or was bothered by the notion of someone looking for likeness or anything else. It was about revealing myself to myself. Another form of interrogation, in a sense, of who or what I am, or what was, what was the end result of my life up to then. But looking at the very early portrait, I'm seeing it for the first time in a long time. You're looking back at a very romantic, idealistic young fella, experimenting, I suppose. I was a classical draftsman. So you're beginning to see probably moves away from that classicism as very indecisive, and it hardly stands up now to my eyes, whatever other people think about it. It was essentially, and I've done self-portraits over the years, but they were always about self-revelation. There were never, in a sense, any grandiose notion of doing a portrait of myself in the classical sense of this going to hang in a gallery representing this historical figure or anything like that. It's just simply, who am I? It was always the question.
Yeah.
And that sounds like psychologically kind of troublesome, but it's not. It's just interrogation. I've interrogated everything and continued to do so over the years.
Amy, you spoke about your return to painting, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Okay.
But when you returned, you began to question, I suppose, your sense in the world, in Ireland in particular. So there's a series of Ireland, Madonna, Mammy paintings that we have at the beginning of the exhibition. So was that a sense of trying to find your way into an Irish identity, or into where you fit into the society that you've come from? Well, this goes right back to our college, in a sense. When I used to sit on the radiator, kind of, along with all the other students, we used to have these rather loud, kind of boisterous arguments about what was art about and what we should be looking for in Ireland, because they were always looking out. There was a lot of, it led to the 60s and the big kind of upheaval in the art schools. But before this was the arguments of, is there such a thing as Irish art? What's internationalism and all that? And I always argued for the notion that there was an Irish art form and it was in the writing, but why wasn't the same intimacy in Irish art? Why did it have to kind of locate itself in pictorial landscape or illustrative landscape or romanticism? That simply wasn't my experience of Ireland. I thought there was another Ireland that people weren't touching, but the writers were. So we used to have these very kind of loud, as I say, boisterous arguments about what they called kind of provincialism. I had this provincial view, as I said, of Irishness, and it was missing the point of international. They wanted to be international, they wanted to look out, whereas I wanted to look in, and they thought it was a bit incestuous, a bit provincial, a bit all that kind of thing. Until, of course, I was a classic draftsman and all that kind of, that's why I was in the art college. That's what they took. When I came to art college, there were about 4 of us who were all brilliant draftspeople. There was Charlie Cullen, there was myself, Alice Hanratty, a fellow called Sweeney, who's in a show band. He earned a lot of money. We hated him. But he was a nice guy, Paul Sweeney. He played in bands and played jazz a lot as well. But it was all about classical drawing. This was all academic drawing. And of course we were all brilliant at it. And it took me some time to kind of come to terms with the notion that there was another way to look at it. That art wasn't pictorial, that there was something else beyond the arms, and this thing was delivered straight off the arms. It was essentially for the eye. It wasn't for here, it wasn't for the heart or the soul or the genitals, as I said. It wasn't for anything really human or basic or primal or
Something, the very nature of art moved you into a transcendent space or something, you know. This stuff didn't. If you were going to illustrate...
But you were being praised for it.
Oh, absolutely.
And there was
the promise of the Academy at 23, all
exactly.
this kind of thing. It promised everything. It was the safest route to eternity, immortality in a sense, in an Irish sense.
Right.
But I thought art was a bigger thing. And it probably came from my life experience. So this is where you're going back. I mean, I would have had, you know, a pretty harsh life experience, you know. My father disappearing when I was about 4 or 5. My mother getting tuberculosis, the family been split. I'd been sent to my grand. Now I had the nice side of it. You know what I mean? I was sent to this. They were remote people. They were very removed emotionally from anything, but they took me in a sense. And it was a fantastic place. It's where I kind of first fell in love with the notion of landscape. And this all goes back to the college, of why landscape was treated as a pictorial kind of thing. It didn't have any spiritual notion or connotation. It had no kind of history, in a sense, other than a pictorial presence. The landscape was a kind of sacred pictorial thing, and everybody did it. Just mine was a different blue. I painted clouds differently. I painted mountains differently.
So what was
and
your
it goes
experience
back to,
in that landscape? What was different?
It was solace. It was a hiding place. It was a womb. It was comforting. I talked to myself way up in trees because nobody else would talk to me.
Were you isolated? Were there groups
Absolutely.
of other...
No.
Like when the children around?
It was where, in a sense, I began to kind of split from myself. There became two. One was the viewer who watched landscape and just loved its beauty, loved its absolute transcendent moments, all that kind of thing. The other one was who lived in it as a protective thing. Yeah. There was this person walking beside me who protected this other person.
This other person is the beginning of the artist.
Yeah, absolutely.
In you.
Yeah.
And the dialogue that you have with yourself is this artist self and self.
Yeah. I am very familiar with myself because I've talked to myself for years.
And is it that being that basically the revelation there that was developed that gave you that doubt in the academic system?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there was another truth altogether in the landscape. It was a personal experience. It wasn't a visual experience. It was a deeply emotional experience. It was a caring, minding, as I say, womb-like experience. It's where I went to actually cry, you know, feel pain, literally feel pain in my stomach. My stomach used to kind of fall out.
You know, your work is full of organized religious symbols.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there was a structure of religion in the family, your grandfather's family. Was there a sense of going to church and devotion, etc.?
There was. It's funny, kind of connecting Graham's, Montgomery's, in a sense, Scottish. Why this absolute kind of essential religious kind of being.
Was there separation then of gender? Churches.
Why my mother was living alone, in a sense, was because some split in the family. And it had to do with something like she remarried after widowhood. Okay. Her first husband died after 6 months or something. She remarried shortly after that, which was a no-no. Yeah. And she was kind of semi-left aside, you know what I mean? Right. My going there was a bit tortured in a sense.
So you didn't have a closeness with your mother then because you were separated?
Oh, I did, yeah. An absolute, I wouldn't call it closeness as much as dependence. It was absolutely dependent. Yeah. I mean, she literally catered for everything. She was an extraordinary woman. She was very, very bright. She used to teach all the local secondary school kids maths at night. Yeah. They came to her for all their kind of, you know, maths learning, all that kind of. She was brilliant in certain ways. But she was left stranded with a family of 4 kids, no money. It was very irregular. Yeah. You know. Yeah. That wouldn't be different to a lot of families around Midlands at that time. And I remember she bought the first knitting machine ever to earn a living, to make some money. Yeah. And that thing used to go all night at times. Yeah. You know, if she was short of money, you'd wake up and hear this gzzzt, gzzzt, gzzzt. You know, it was relentless. Yeah. I mean, it was unbelievable. Yeah. But it tells you about that time, in a sense. And when you came to a place like the art school, which was rather exclusive and out of reality in a sense. These were all kind of art school, relatively wealthy youngsters going in there. They were all, I was going on scholarships, all that kind of thing.
So did you
And
feel
I was living year to year on scholarships.
Outsider in that
Oh,
environment?
absolutely, yeah. These were comfortable people.
Yeah.
They were well able to speak for themselves. I was hesitant, I couldn't talk, I was very self-conscious. I was also kind of aware of this, people standing behind me looking at what I'm doing, saying, ooh, ah, that kind of thing. And so there was this split between adulation on one side, that's the proper word for it, and then this kind of terrified figure in another.
Which led to a breakdown?
Well, alcoholism.
Alcoholism.
I remember my first drink to this day. I remember people, well, I was forced actually.
But then
to
that
take my first
hiatus,
drink.
that alcoholism and then the recovery meant you actually gave up art, painting.
Well, the crisis really was the Nalde exhibition.
Okay.
You know, and a fellow called Desmond, I forget his second name now, coming into one day when I was drawing, and I had all these little mannerisms and all this kind of thing. This is the way we differentiated ourselves in college at that time. This is my style, this is your style. That was all you had, in a sense, to differentiate what we were all doing. We're all doing the one thing, but my little tricks were better than your little tricks.
Right.
And that's what the academy is. If you go along, well, the older academy, it's a different thing now. The older academy was his tricks and your tricks and, you know, mannerisms, affectation, all that kind of stuff. And that's what art was. And that was the expectation that that's what it should be and was all it was going to be. Until I saw Nalde. And I hated it. This was I was struck to the floor with hate. I mean, I was struck first by the power of it. And yet they were beautifully gentle, small watercolours, you know. But the way he destroyed that tightly controlled notion of fine art, this was just art. It came off the very being of Nalde. I'm sure, I don't know, you know, doubtful and all as his politics were, we were all to discover later. But to me, he was this amazingly powerful artist who reached me in a way no other art ever did before. This was extraordinary. I wasn't looking at it with my eyes, I just felt it here. It was like a punch in the gut. That's why I hated it. Because I knew I was literally forced to make a decision at that time. And I simply wasn't able for it.
And did that decision take time to realise, or was it literally a lightning bolt moment where you then realised?
It was really a lightning bolt, in a sense. And I was left stranded, because all I had were these gifts. And I didn't know how to deal with it. What am I going to do with this? How do you let it go, or what do you do with it? You know, do you try it? I tried all these funny, kind of terrible abstraction things, agonized kind of figures. Oh, geez, it's really kind of children's art kind of stuff. And I simply couldn't cope with it. And eventually, you know, I took to booze like a duck to water, because it gave me a sense of, you know, absolute oneness. For the first time in my life, I felt joined to myself in a way that no other time in my life did I ever feel that, even as a kid or anything, before or after or whatever. But I felt absolutely unified. My very first drink was, you know, a revelation. It's the only way I can describe it. And by God, did I take to it, you know. This was saving my life, as I thought. And I could argue, you know, and shout and, you know, take a stage and talk about art. First time in my life, you know.
But a few years of that took about...
It took about 18 years. You know,
18 years.
18 years. And I wound up in mental hospitals. I wound up in kind of all kinds of pretty rough situations.
So you ended up as that thing in the Irish psyche of the has-been or wasted potential.
And it came to a point where I had to decide, you know, if I was going to actually live or not, you know, in a sense. And did I want to do art again or not?
So when you did come back to it, I noticed that you began to forge out a very unique language, a language that was local. But also, looking back over 40 years, it's actually universal. It's actually... But so for instance, I see you starting, I suppose, with the family and looking back at your own family and maybe even your own conception.
It was very personal.
And in Transfiguration, we look at the next generation coming on. So there's two things sort of... You're looking with materials from your life. But that becomes a universal theme.
Well, there was nothing left. except to construct something from the wreckage of my, last 18 years.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what that was. It had to be constructed on the canvas. There was nobody telling me, this is your problem, that's your problem. I had stopped drinking, but I had no form of life to move into.
Why don't you just go back and use your facility and
Oh
join
yeah,
the
that would
academy,
but no, I would have immediately kind of seen that as
Fall
failure,
back off,
absolute failure, because I simply knew it wasn't the truth as I experienced truth.
Yeah.
And I also discovered the fact that my biggest problem was being an artist. In the classical sense, I would approach everything that I wanted to do with notes, sketches, the whole classical way of approaching, full of knowledge, I'm going to do this.
Which is evident in all of the work. So the very thing you're trying to reject, you use.
It was the first time
so we see your notes, we see,
it was the first time
details, thumbnail sketches.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted certainty still.
Okay,
and
so
that was the big
you
failing.
need to cling to that.
That was the big failing in trying to make art as I believed it. And it took me a long time. I really got depressed over it, really badly depressed, just kind of this half the past, half the present, half something half-baked between what I was trying to do. Until one day I just got so depressed. There was absolutely nothing, just barren inside, empty. I walked to a canvas, start making marks. And I discovered for the first time that the canvas and the paint, if you let them alone, would flow from the very physicality of whatever you felt. And that was a big leap for me. I had to trust in something that I was not in control of anymore. And then I discovered that if at the very end, I'm going to see this through, this canvas, see what it would teach me, in a sense. To be taught by action rather than thinking, or by certainty, or by art is this, is that, is not, or the other, or whatever. And so by the end of the canvas, it was crazy. It was a mess. It was a huge mess. So I decided I'm going to leave it alone as much as I can. I'm going to become an artist for just enough to hold this together. And that became the art. Holding something together. Really kind of minding it. Because to me, something beautiful was happening, oddly enough. It looked as ugly as sin, but it was my child. This is the first time I owned anything. I never owned my gift, believe it or not. It was always something
well, you can see
given
that,
to me by
you
others.
You can see that struggle. You can see that sort of sense of finding this new language. And it's an angry language at the start.
Yes.
So going back to the works in the 80s, we look at the Yellow Bitter Inn, or we look Hopalong Cassidy.
I had a lot of people to blame.
If we look at Hopalong Cassidy, that's an angry painting, and there's a lot of anger in it. But it's also how, looking back on it, even though initially you were venturing into an unknown space in the studio, in the work.
There was no voice for it.
But looking back on it, there's actually a lot of art, historical references, and you're beginning to deconstruct the whole process of painting. So by turning the canvas around, we see the stretcher. You cut the stretcher in half. You tear the canvas. So it's like breaking the fourth wall almost of theatre. And so you're using the tools of process, of art history process, and you're rejecting them, or else you're revealing them. And the difference between looking again at those early works, which are really dense, angry, dark.
Thank you.
You're at the same time.
He's a fan.
At the same time, years later, using the same knowledge that you brought in this time of painting, working, learning about painting from one as it leads into the next, we arrive at something so free and still unknown. You're still allowing the canvas be itself. You're still allowing the paint to be itself. So we have Captain's Hill here. I think what was and the
Captain's Hill is in particular
2018. This wonderful blue, celestial blue that we have. Again, you touch upon bits of memory that you have from your life, but you're more importantly allowing the freedom of the paint to come to the surface.
No, I learned early on the paint delivered the painting to me. If I let it, if I didn't interfere too much.
How long
if
did you
at
have
the
to
very
wait?
end, sometimes 8 years. Hopalong Cassidy took probably about 8 to 10 years
Yeah.
in the making, because I kept working at it. It was like, you know, watching a child grow up in a sense.
So,
And you were there to see it kind of coming to maturity in a sense. When you know, that's it, it's finished.
how do you know it's finished?
Just the clock stops, time stops, everything. There's nothing more. You walk to that canvas and you destroy it. You know, I know it looks really destroyed as it is, but it is held together by literally threads, and I simply wanted that to be, you know, in a sense. It was an element of my life, my own life experience. I was held together by threads, literally, at the end. I mean, there wasn't much left by the time I finished drinking and kind of all that kind of. There wasn't much to save either. So I had to construct everything from art, in a sense. I had to reconstruct myself from art, or find myself in art. I know it's a bit of a cliche nowadays, but at that stage, you know. But I also began to re-love the whole notion of art, because this was a revelation to me, and I loved the notion of revelation. And I also began to understand that the eye wasn't the end of art. You know, that if you entertained the eye, you were doing, you know, great art. I knew there was something else implied great art, and it was the implied self, you know, in here, all of that kind of thing, somehow articulated by simply moving paint around on a canvas, that it would arrive at a point of truth. And I used to have to stand back at a canvas and say, what the hell is going on here, you know? And in a sense, that's what I mean. The paintings taught me about how to be an artist, how to be a person, how to interrogate things, how to look for truth. How to be sympathetic later about all those I was angry about. How to actually round out the whole notion. Truth wasn't about one thing. There were many kind of angles to truth. Yeah. You know, there was this kind of truth that you know the way people talk about in half-truths about something as though it's the whole truth. Yeah. But, and you discover the beauty of things, in a sense.
Talk about discovery, actually. There's a whole new series of drawings that we have in the exhibition. And titled Sheela and the Gig. Yeah. Maybe, how did that come about, that whole interest? And
in part because Thelma and I moved, that's my wife, Thelma and I moved to Mayo for a time. We had a cottage there and a small studio. So we used to go over quite often. And I just loved the place. A lot of the landscape you see here comes from Mayo, especially that silvery, beautiful silvery silent paintings, you know, those kind of, that landscape over there. But I remember passing this little graveyard constantly, going in and out of, from Killala to Ballina. You know, we used to go shopping in Ballina on Saturdays. And we passed this little graveyard on the way, in and out, in and out, in and out. And inside there was this little soldier on this little plinth. And I kept saying to myself, I must stop something to see what that's about. Yeah. But I passed it almost year in, year out, and it was for years. And then suddenly one day I said, that's it, I'm going in, I can't put up with this anymore. I'm going in, this is driving me crazy. What's a British soldier in a pit helmet and a musket and an old-fashioned uniform standing in the middle of an Irish graveyard? What is this? Has someone's family connection here or something? So I went in to examine it. I was looking up, and then I looked down. And there was this Sheela and the Gig in all its glory, on part of the pedestal. It had crumbled away, and there it was. And I remember the absolute sensational kind of feeling of kind of, good grief, you know, it was an amazing kind of sense of, the power of it was extraordinary. It's just like coming on something revelationary. It really was a revelation, and I didn't know how to take it. I remember being afraid almost to call Thelma and say, would you look at this, you know, because there was a sense of that awful kind of, this is awful, this is ugly, this is something. And yet there was this powerful draw to it. Absolute drawn to it in a sense that I knew that here there's some truth about the church, about history, about women, gender, or whatever, you know. Only I wouldn't have called it gender at the time. I would have called it very sexual. This was this gaping vulva, you know. It was an extraordinary thing because I was raised in the tightest of kind of constricted sexuality isn't the word for it. If I looked at a girl, you get a clip in the ear, you know, or you'd be beaten by the Christian Brothers, whatever. They were terrified of the body. And here was this most blatant exposure of the body in all its kind of beauty in a sense. It was a revelation to the power of the body for the first time in my life, in a sense, in the rawest possible way. I've seen many Sheela gigs in photographs, but to see it in actuality, it was almost like a gift from somewhere, in a sense. But it left me kind of really in need to kind of explain it to myself in drawings and paintings in whatever way. And I've been doing it for a long time now.
Revelation, was that akin to what you saw in Nolde?
Yeah, the same
That
kind
punch.
of punch in the gut.
Yeah.
That this is vital, this is important somehow, and I'm not up to it yet. I don't know what to do with this. How do you do this? Do you just do a drawing in the normal sense, in the old-fashioned way, make a classical drawing of it or whatever? And then I remember Barry Cook's Sheela gigs, where he actually stuck them onto the canvas, little clay figures, and hardened them and stuck them on. And I remember thinking, comparing them then, and it's nothing against Barry Cook, I loved his paintings, but it simply didn't kind of meet what I saw and felt with this little thing. It probably came from that really oppressed kind of time of my life where simply the priests ruled the world and the Christian brothers. It was dominated by religion. Every move people made, they looked behind them to see who was kind of, what priest was around them or whatever.
How do you feel about where Ireland is now?
It's an extraordinary place.
And it's an extraordinary place. Have we lost anything, or
yeah,
have
I
we
do.
gained?
I think you've lost a kind of in a sense, any ideological, anything starting with the idealism of truth. You have to be very careful to nurture, because it soon turns into an ideological set, and then it becomes kind of what would I call it? Do this or else, or believe this or else, or believe. We have the truth. We are the holders of truth. It's like the church. You get this opposite side of the coin, and because it's a civilian kind of notion, doesn't kind of absolve it from the same dogmatic ideology that is becoming, in a sense, part of today's conversation, or hardly conversation, but diktat sometimes. So truth has to be nurtured. It has to be minded, I think, very carefully. As I learned myself, there were always parts of truth I didn't want to confront, because they would forgive things. I had a lot of forgiving to do through art, in a sense, looking back, and understanding. I had to understand young guys going into kind of, priesthood at 14 and 15, knowing nothing about their bodies, coming into puberty. What in the name of Christ were they going to do with celibacy? When it hit them full in the face, when they saw a beautiful boy or a beautiful girl or whatever. And when sex reared its beautiful kind of, presence, what were they going? So I began to understand that, as well as the kind of, what I didn't understand, I didn't forgive, was the sadistic element of that. Where frustrated sex became sadism, in a sense, in Christian brothers especially. They beat people senseless. I saw boys with snot running down their faces, tears running down their faces, simply being beaten to a pulp. Officially. Parents agreeing with this kind of stuff. It was a terrifying experience. I don't think anybody here in this age, or born at a certain age, understands the terror kids had towards education in schools. I simply got no education. I was too terrified. My whole presence in school was to say nothing, hide, mind yourself.
You're a survivor, so.
Just about, at times. But, and it's that experience that comes in that you can't, how could you avoid that as part of this kind of being in this state? And that's what I was talking about as a kid in the art college, that there is another voice here. If you're looking for internationalism, I'm looking for home, I'm looking for to reconstruct myself, I'm looking
But the thing that's evident is that internationalism comes, universal comes through the
I have no
local,
problem with internationalism, but it belongs to whoever, in a sense, formed the process and wound up with it or whatever.
On another level, in our current times that we're in, I see there's the immigrant boat that is there. So obviously there's issues of the day that come into the studio, come into the work that maybe
Yeah.
you are responding to. So we have the drone, the drawing of the
Yeah,
drone,
yeah.
the immigrant boat, but also these, it's not literal
No.
reaction,
No.
but it's like as if war is recurring throughout history. So
Yeah,
it's a meditation on, I mean, if that's war, refugees and immigration, well, we've had the emigration from the famine. So it's a sense of pouring out of
I read the Bible a lot, not for a religious kind of comfort or anything else. I just love the poetry of it. It is beautiful to read. And I got all these kind of poured out as water. All these things come from biblical quotations, whatever. And they suited me, my experience of being not a biblical one or not a religious one, but of being poured out and then having, in a sense, myself poured back in from another source or whatever.
I suppose I was just looking at how you were comparing basically the tragedy of current events, of war or of famine, of historical things, how these momentous, long view of history seems to reoccur in your paintings. And maybe that's because of your reading of the Bible, your meditation upon the existential condition of humans that we live in. And that comes true in these iconic images, even though you don't consciously get an illustration and I'm going to go, follow this on a sketch. It seems to, in allowing the paint be itself, it seems to be a record of the historical times that
absolutely
we're living through.
And it doesn't mean human beings change. Do you mean in the sense that they reveal something to themselves that changed them entirely? It changes the whole notion of ego, especially ego. The one thing you can't afford to in front of a canvas is have an ego. Where you start telling the canvas what it should be. You stop listening or hearing the canvas. But I had the luck, if you like, or the gift of having time to destroy the character who was very damaged, or not destroy, but to discover this was a very damaged person, a very hurt person. And through art and through everything, I reconstructed a reality. Now, I'm not talking about another lie or another kind of so unconscious kind of reaction to the world or whatever. I'm talking about a reality that I am like this, people are like this, we are like this, I am part of the human race, I have all the frailties, I have all the angers, I have all the things, but I've learned about them in a way that teach me a little truth about what these things are and what they can do. And my kind of revelation, if you like, personal revelation, is that, egos, ideologies, all these things come into the frailty of kind of just being human without learning anything about truth and what truth tells you about landscape, about environment, about war, about sexuality. I think we lost the notion in sexuality of just how beautiful it is, how absolutely gorgeous it is, how sensuous it is, all that kind of thing. We become frightened of it in a way. Again, a turn of the coin from the 40s and the 50s, where we were terrified of it. We were terrified of the very physicality.
Are you at peace with yourself now?
Yeah. In the sense that I happily, I'm delighted I don't know what I think I know. That's too complicated. But of course, that nothing is resolved, and that's okay.
And that brings me to one of the paintings, Half Light, that we've hung there in Gallery 11. And there's no figurative element in it.
No.
There's just...
I've done a few of those,
non-figurative.
Yeah.
Again, is there something there that... is that finished, or is that you're waiting for something to happen? Or what type of space is that the canvas is
That's
portraying?
Just sheer kind of stillness in myself. If you walk out early, try it yourself some morning. Walk out early in a Mayo morning at 4 or 5 in the morning, and the silvery kind of light is extraordinary. You're not going to do a Connemara landscape. You're not going to do this. You're going to struggle. How do I make a silvery silence with little revelations here, there, little shining things coming through, And you do it with greys and little purples and yellows. Now, when I say you do it, I had to find out that's how you do it. For me, I discovered, in that kind of sense, I discovered Rothko. Now, I've known Rothko for years, but I knew what Rothko was at in Mayo, standing at the edge of a cliff, looking into this, throwing your voice out and say, if you're out there, let me know. Nothing came back, by the way. But there was this beautiful moment of letting go absolutely and being carried into this kind of silver silence. It was just, and that happens a lot. If I go for walks in certain places, there are these little gifts of silence all over the place. And how do you do that with paint, this beautiful stuff? How do you do it? You can't illustrate it. You can't make a picture of this.
Yeah.
So you're willing, in a sense, life teaches you to be willing to let go of all your kind of minded gifts. This is me.
Does it get easier as you get older to let go?
Yeah, because you've learned. I have learned.
Yeah. And
I've learned there's also, by the way, no way of avoiding the confrontation with that. I still go into the studio. When I start a canvas, there is a war with my ego.
Yeah.
I have all the drawings. I know what the painting is. To this day, I cannot stop doing that. And to this day, I cannot stop going to the canvas, painting what I know and how to do it and what it's all about and all that kind of thing. And 3 weeks later, having to scrape it all off again and sit down in a chair almost kind of in despair. And it is really deep kind of anxiety that I can't, this is finished, I can't do it. I'll have to go back to drawing again, all this kind of. And then the moment comes where I walk to the canvas, I make a mark. It's a mark I've made for 3 months or so beforehand. It never spoke to me in the way it does now.
Yeah.
And this time you're prepared to follow it. Before I used to cut it short. That's not what I want. This time, that's what it wants. The canvas and the paint wants this. Now that sounds like childlike stuff. And it is. To be caught with something that carries you along to one side of the canvas and back and picks the colour, you go to the palette, you pick the colour, it's there and it begins to, And at the end you sit back and again it's this kind of, can I just hold it? That's where the art comes in. It's no longer trying to impress you with my beautiful skill or craft or anything like that. It's to hold this event together. So that's part of it.
So I take it you go on.
Oh yeah, I mean, look at me, I'm 108 and I'm still going into a studio.
I can't go on, I will go on.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Well, it's great talking to you as well, whoever you are.